station. Uh, it's getting pretty official now. I've got all my images uploaded, have at least a couple things nailed down as far as formatting the RSS feed. Basically, all the stuff that makes this show up in iTunes is taken care of. So it's rolling along, and this is the third recording, so I'm trying to record at a different uh, sample rate. Hopefully it still sounds good, and the file is smaller. That'll make it easier to download. Although, given how many people have really fast cable internet, I don't think that's going to be a problem. But it helps out storage, and that's what I kept misstating. I think in the first two recordings, I kept calling it bandwidth. The bandwidth isn't really a hosting issue, it's the storage. So I upgraded that storage, and now I have way more room to play with, which is cool because I don't have to worry about that now. And if you've listened to the second one, the quality's way, way better. I was able to remove a lot more noise, and I think the adjustments I made to try to control the volume levels were a little bit more even. So hopefully it just gets better and better, and I'll hone in on a good balance between file size and quality. Um, One thing that I notice is that every movement I make really resonates through the microphone, so I've been pretty much trying to be perfectly still, and I had no idea how loud the table that I use my computer on is. Just when you shift your weight and you lean on the table, it's really creaky. I never noticed that before. And the same thing with the chair that I sit in. If you recline even a couple of inches, it gets pretty loud. I'm gonna have to pause this for 1 second to make an adjustment. Okay, so if you've been listening and noticed that change, thank you for listening to the other episodes. I really, really appreciate it. And it looks like somebody's downloading this. Reminds me of when I had a website before, a long time ago. It was about probably 10 years ago now. I would get statistics back from it, and not a whole lot of interaction or engagement, as people now call it, but I would get all these hits and visits, and I always thought there were bots. So every now and then, when I did things on my websites, I would refer to visitors as bots, and you know, maybe bots are people too. Maybe they have opinions. Maybe they could subscribe and leave a comment or give me some feedback, something, just to know that I'm doing okay. Like I said, this isn't to feed my ego. This is to pretty much provide a service for free. So, I don't know if you heard that. It happened again. I moved just a little bit and the chair creaks like crazy. So, um, himself a long sigh until his lungs were empty. Not that he needed to, but it gave him that paradoxical blankness he needed in order to focus. He put on a dark gray suit, which he always wore for night calls, and walked down to the basement. He unlocked the safe in the wall, removed the spinner, and placed it in his pants pocket. Before leaving, he picked up the phone. Sorry, I'm gonna have to pause again real quick. Sorry about that. Just trying to make sure everything's right here. Before leaving, he picked up his other phone, the one that required a retinal scan to use. It dialed only one number. "Root in here," he said without waiting for a greeting. "Code 3 at the main lab. It's Troy. Block outgoing traffic." He hung up. Working for Ellen Brittle Research Associates was 99% background checks and paperwork. The remaining percent attending to urgent matters that no one wanted to know or speak about. Of course, every organization involved with space exploration contracted EPRA, but not because they wanted to. As he stepped outside, Ronan drew a crisp breath. The stench of smog had nearly dissipated, and the air was infused with the fresh earthiness of redwoods. It was so calming, he decided to drive with the windows down. After 30 minutes of switchbacking through the mountain, he arrived at the Space and Science Satellite Laboratory. As an EPRA employee, he drove right past the guard shack and security gate. The nerves in his arms started warming like he was about to give a speech. There was only one other car in the parking lot. Perfect. He ran his keycard over the exterior door lock and stepped inside the laboratory. "Anyone home?" he shouted. Past several rows of supercomputers, all with the same tacky screensaver, a head floated in this sea of blue monitor light. "Is that you, Troy?" asked Ronan. Troy's head turned so fast his hair smacked his glasses. "Director Ronan," said Troy. His face hung startled like he was yanked out of another dimension. "Thanks for coming so late. I followed EPRA's instructions and contacted you immediately." "I'm glad you did," said Ronan as he approached. "What have you got?" Troy rubbed his eyelids from under his glasses. He probably hadn't slept in days. That's about how long it usually took. "I went over some of the particle field artifacts that kept showing up in our simulation runs," he said. "The holographic environments we made are almost indistinguishable from reality, and I know what you're doing," Ronan interrupted. "Go on." Troy nodded and continued. "After major progress with the field-induced particle alignment, we got these weird signal effects, artifacts we've never seen before. The models worked for a second, but the artifacts would distort them. We had a hollow of an entire building that looked so real you could touch it." Troy threw back a swig of soda followed by a gulp of coffee. "It didn't make sense, so I analyzed the artifacts and found all kinds of low-frequency junk." "What?" said Ronan. "It's like cosmic background radiation," said Troy. Ronan let him keep talking and slid his hand stealthily into his pocket like a spear. "It's complex, but there's pieces of it, and the electromagnetic properties of stars and nebulas and black holes, like they're related." "That's incredible," Ronan said with a smile. "I ran multiple pass algorithms over most of the artifact data," Troy blurted out. His head bobbed as he spoke, like his body was manufacturing more energy than it could handle. Ronan pushed his hand down farther. His tips grazed the cold metal frame of the spinner. "What did you find?" he asked, trying to appear surprised. "It's a key," exclaimed Troy, waving his arms frantically. "It could explain what our universe is made of. Matter, antimatter, dark matter." Troy almost knocked his coffee off the desk the spinner halfway out and cupped in his hand. Troy hammered his keyboard a few times and leaned towards the monitor. Rudin lifted the spinner towards Troy's head. It's like a song, yelled Troy. It rotates through a range of frequencies, like notes in a symphony. Let's not forget, said Rudin. He pointed the spinner at the base of Troy's neck. Hypothesize, then verify. We can't tell anyone now, asked Troy as he swiveled in his chair and caught a glimpse of the spinner. What's that, a gun? He pedaled the chair backwards reflexively. Sorry, said Rudin, lunging forward. He threw one hand over Troy's face, blocking his vision, and quickly plunged the spinner into his neck. It hissed out a discharge of high voltage and a paralytic cocktail of drugs. Troy gasped. It would only take a few seconds. Rudin stepped back, and Troy's skinny frame flopped to the floor like a bag of sticks. When he was forced, Rudin didn't mind blackmailing or framing the innocent. He didn't even mind killing someone to prevent the rest of the world from seeing past the holographic veil of the universe. Nobody, including himself, needed to know that. But he did mind the faces people made when he put them down. Troy's chin rammed violently against his chest as he tried to inhale, clicking out wet, choking sounds. His mouth gasped wider and wider in a struggle to capture oxygen. His eyes bulged bright red, and then his pupils expanded in euphoria. The barbiturates were finally kicking in. Rudin wanted to look away, but he couldn't take any chances. He held Troy's wrist, partially to monitor his pulse, and partially to comfort him as he drifted from existence. You figured it out, said Rudin. It is a song, and it says, stay inside and don't come out. That's the end. So that took a good 10 minutes or so. Oh, I probably made more noise just then. So, in both the previous recordings, I did have to cut out a few things, and I didn't go back to edit them. I'm not too concerned with making sure everything is stitched together properly, so if you're actually listening to this and you notice that at some point there are gaps or there seem to be things missing, that's just because there was probably some kind of background noise and I just cut it out. So that's hopefully not a problem. If you actually care about things like that, then you can leave me some feedback and I'll work on trying to fix that. But for now, I'm gonna avoid getting too obsessive about um, the the actual content as far as I care for ASMR. I just like people whispering. I don't really mind what they're whispering about. And as I mentioned before, if it gets too interesting, then I start to wake up. So hopefully this is something that doesn't get your attention too much. Um, so that story, reading it now a couple of years later, was kind of painful, but I still like the idea of it, which is, I don't know how well it communicated, but the the character Rudin is responsible for tying up loose ends that expose the true nature of the universe, or at least what we see when we're exploring space, which some type of simulation. You could call it a computer simulation, but that word is just a symbol for something that calculates and uh, does computation. So um, that type of alternate explanation, that type of alternate explanation is something that really interests me. I don't know if I believe it, but I think there's some pretty compelling things, observations we can make that at least seem consistent with that type of reality. Unfortunately, it may not be something we can ever test, so which is fine. I don't need to know theories that explain things um, perfectly or even have observable data, but the concept of it is kind of cool to think about. And of course, the Matrix movie always comes up with that. There are similar concepts. So in this story, it wasn't exactly a simulation necessarily, but it was holographic in nature. Those are related things, not the same thing, but it is the idea of an alternate universe, or almost a massive conspiracy to keep humanity from understanding the universe that we actually live in. And um, this character was commissioned with keeping track of people who work on modeling space, or even modeling reality using holographic technology. And this one guy kind of stumbled across an artifact, and he obsessed over it, and he kept looking into it, and he found that the holographs that they were generating were similar to reality in certain ways, and um, that exposed him. So the character basically had to kill him. Maybe he's some type of assassin, but closer to security, maybe like a national security type of guy. Um, it's really interesting when you read something you wrote a while ago. That story had so many things that basically irk me now, but just because it was limited in a lot of ways. There were definitely some awkward parts. One thing that I try to focus way more on is keeping the focus on mostly on a character, but watching how it shifts between um, almost like narrative exposition and actual events in that story. The first couple paragraphs, it's kind of going in and out, explaining things, going back to the guy, and it really doesn't have a good flow to it. The last time I did this recording, at least in this position, I kept hearing these like low rumbling sounds, and now I'm wondering if it's when I but then still I'm touching a keypad that's on the same surface as the mic. I wonder if I put some cloth or something below the mic, if that would make it better. Let's do. Oh wow. I'm gonna have to re-record that. That was really loud. Extant. And that's a show on television right now of something written or painted still in existence. Rejuvenate. Make young again. That one's pretty simple. Rebate. REBATE. Return or part of a payment. Discount. Verb. Huh. I said that like rebate. It's rebate. I put the wrong emphasis on the wrong syllable. I keep finding easy words. Forlorn, sad and lonely, wretched, desolate. That's a good word. I don't use that very often. Gentility, those of gentle birth, high social class, refinement, quality of being genteel. Exacerbate, worsen, aggravate, embitter. Enervate, weaken, to take energy away from. Well, that's a good word. Let's see. Cogent. That means convincing. I think I've seen that word in other vocabulary lists before. This reminds me of these tapes that were popular in the, I think it was the 80s. Actually, it might not have even been specific to any certain decade, but there was definitely a trend with tapes that you listen to while you sleep and you learn things, supposedly subconsciously. I don't think there's any evidence that that really works, but it's interesting if this is playing and you're actually asleep by this part. If any part of your mind can hear this, that would be kind of interesting, or at least thinking about it is. Probably not at all likely to happen, but that would be really cool if it did happen that way. You could get like a degree in your sleep. I forget where I read it, but somebody was recently talking about how our cell phones and computers are already extensions of our mind, and I think it's just a matter of time before that kind of technology gets integrated into our bodies, and then it really doesn't matter that it's your like your actual brain, your neurons, or a computer doing it. That's irrelevant. Jose Saramago, I think is how you say his name. He sounds Spanish. I apologize if I can't pronounce that correctly. And he's a highly acclaimed literary fiction writer. His his book Blindness became a movie, along with The Double became Enemy with Jake Gyllenhaal in it, and that's why I checked it out, because I saw the movie and then I saw it was based on a book by an author I'd already read. And if you see the movie, which I definitely recommend, um, it's worth checking out, just because it's not really that predictable, and it is, well, I don't want to spoil anything, but it may or may not be ambiguous. Actually, that's part of the fun of it, even figuring out if it's that kind of movie or not. There may be a definitive answer to it, but none of it's worth discussing if you haven't seen it. So, um, I'm gonna read just the first couple of paragraphs, which I thought were pretty good. Really good, actually. I've never read anything like it. I don't think that's any copyright violation. I mean, this is, it's not like I'm reproducing the whole work, and if I just read a little excerpt from it, I think that's okay. It probably doesn't even get close to exceeding, um, I guess, how much of something you'd have to reproduce for it to be a copyright infringement. So, let's see here. Yeah, he's a Nobel Prize winner. Um, very, very good writer. Very unique too. I don't think I've ever read anything like this before. And I feel terrible. I don't know if he's Spanish, maybe he's Portuguese. I'd have to look that up, and I can't do it right now, but oh no, okay, he is Portuguese, so it's translated, and even then, it's still very unique. I've always wondered how translation works for books that are this almost free form. If you are interested in this, highly recommend you check it out and see for yourself. There's a lot of really, really long sentences. So this is The Double by Jose Saramago. The man who has just come into the shop to rent a video bears on his identity card a most unusual name, a name with a classical flavor that time has stalled, neither more nor less than Tertulliano Maximo Afonso. The Maximo and the Afonso, which are in more common usage, he can just about tolerate, depending, of course, on the mood he's in, but the Tertulliano weighs on him like a gravestone, and he has done ever since he first realized that the wretched name lent itself to being spoken in an ironic, potentially offensive tone. He is a history teacher at a secondary school, and at college he suggested the video to him with the warning, "It's not exactly a masterpiece of cinema, but it must keep you amused for an hour and a half." Tertulliano Maximo Afonso is greatly in need of stimuli to distract him. He lives alone and gets bored, or, to speak with clinical exactitude, present day requires, he has succumbed to the temporary weakness of spirit ordinarily known as depression. To get a clear idea of his situation, suffice it to say that he was married, but can no longer remember what led him into matrimony, that he is divorced, and cannot now bring himself to ponder the reasons for the separation. On the other hand, while the ill-fated union produced no children, who are now demanding to be handed gratis, I don't know how to say that word exactly, but I've read it a lot, the world on a silver platter, he has for some time viewed Sweet History, the serious educational subject which he has felt called upon to teach, in which he could have been a soothing refuge for him, as a chore without meaning and a beginning without an end. For those of a nostalgic temperament, who tend to be fragile and somewhat inflexible, living alone is the harshest of punishments, but it must be said such a situation, however painful, only rarely develops into a cataclysmic drama of the kind that make skin prick and the hair stand on end. What one mostly sees, indeed it hardly comes as a surprise anymore, are people patiently submitting to solitude's meticulous scrutiny. Recent public examples, though not particularly well known, and two of whom even met with a happy ending, being the portrait painter, who we only ever knew by his first initial, the G.P., who returned from exile to die in the arms of the beloved fatherland, the proofreader who drove out a truth in order to plant a lie in its place, the lowly clerk in the central registry office who made off with certain death certificates, all of these, either by chance or coincidence, were members of the male sex, but none of them had the misfortune to be called Tertulliano, and this was doubtless an inestimable advantage to them and their relations with other people. The shop assistant, who had already taken down from the shelf the video requested, entered in the logbook the title of the film and the day's date, then indicated to the customer the place where he should sign. This recording's already getting pretty long, so I'll stop there, but these are just some incredibly long sentences, and their structure is very hard to parse out while you read it. It's definitely not a book you read while you're drifting off, or you can't pay attention that well. You seriously have to read it with patience, and there's a lot to admire. I have not read this book, but I read The Sand